What a time to be alive. If only you knew how powerful you were as a black person, they will not only respect you, they'll also bow at your feet. They are already afraid of you. That is why they're doing everything they can to make sure you don't recognize your power. France's downfall does not need to be studied because it's as easy as ABC. They are broke. They have fired their third prime minister within 1 year. Look at this photo. No matter how many prime ministers you fire, you will not be able to dig yourself out of this because you're poor, you're broke. Without Africa, you're nothing.
France is collapsing, and that's not an exaggeration. That's what many people around the world are saying right now. A nation that once stood as one of the strongest powers in Europe is now facing protest, political instability, and the looming reality of financial decline. Hi everyone, how are you doing today? Welcome back to Trending Pulse Worldwide. My name is Amy, and on this channel, we take a closer look at the biggest stories shaping our world today. And before we dive into the videos, if you're new here, kindly consider subscribing and joining the family, because here I bring you stories that matter, stories that spark conversations, and stories that the world is reacting to right now. Let's take a look at what's really happening in France and why people are saying the country is on the verge of collapse. Alright, let's get into it.
France did not see what is happening in West Africa coming. So they find themselves at a time when they are very weak economically, when at home the population of immigrants is growing bigger and bigger. You go to cities such as Marseille, you find Algerians, you find Moroccans, you find Senegalese, you find Guineans, you find Burkinabe, and things are not happening as they used to be then in the former colonies that you thought you are controlling. A breed of young men and women begin rising. They rise in Guinea-Conakry, and the first thing they do is they say, we abolish all the agreements that exist between us and France. They rise in Burkina Faso and they say the same thing. They rise in Mali and they say the same thing. They rise in Niger, which has been providing you with uranium. Now you can't take it. I think they cannot take it because they are losing food which has been inside of their mouth, and they do not know how to behave. As somebody once said, without Africa, there is no France. Without our former colonies, give France only 20 years, and it will be one of the poorest nations in the continent of Europe. And that is going to happen. And they are resisting because for them, this is life and death.
France is collapsing and their economy is in shambles, but there is something a lot of people is not telling you. The reason why France is collapsing and their entire civilization is up in flames is because Africa, the continent, is cutting them off. Multiple African countries is cutting off France from their resources. You understand why a handful of African countries seem so poor based on perspective? It is because 90% of their income, of their earnings from their resources goes directly to France, and that stabilizes their economy. Niger, for example, cut off France from their uranium, and now Niger is going to use their uranium for their benefit alone. For the longest time, I have waited for this. I waited for the collapse of Europe and see if they can actually manage to pull through without the resources of Africa. Can Europe actually strive without the colonialism on Africa? Is it possible? We're about to find out. The UK is also facing significant pressure from Nigeria, because Nigeria is thinking about cutting these people off as well. If you ask me, Nigeria should have done that by now. Get rid of teaching French in schools and focus on your own language. Ethiopia just opened up a massive game changer, created one of the biggest dams in the world. The day of European rule is coming to an end, and the rise of Africa is finally upon us. I think it's about that time to go back home.
The prayer that many African nations have been waiting for has finally been answered. You see, France is collapsing. For many decades, France has been printing currencies for almost 45 African nations. And these African leaders, because they're naive and ignorant, they let that happen. You see, A little tiny nation like this, a little tiny piece of land controls almost half of the continent. And these African leaders, they let that happen. And now France is collapsing. See, France cannot survive without Africa. France is not capable of surviving on its own. It is because African leaders were letting this happen, they let the exploitation continue. That is why France was actually surviving. And now that France is being pushed out of Africa, many African countries does not want the presence of France anymore in the continent. France's economy is collapsing.
So the French government has fallen again, but international news media is going to be very shy about telling us the real reason why it's fallen, the economic reasons why it's fallen. On his way out, the ousted Prime Minister, Mr. Francois, said, "You might kick me out, you might remove me, but that does not change the economic problems for the country." I'm paraphrasing. The real reason why France has failed as a government is because Africa has taken its power back. Ever since the country of Niger in the Sahel, in Central West Africa, decided to nationalize its uranium, France has never been the same again. This uranium that state-owned companies like Orano, French-owned companies like Orano had been siphoning, stealing under the previous government, today, Niger turned off the faucet. Niger said no more. So Niger, under the new governance of President Tiani, is nationalizing its uranium. This uranium France was stealing not only to light its beautiful cities like Paris and Nice, it was also using it to run its electrical manufacturing and industries. All of these are processing and running their nuclear reactors on top of it all. So these things that are the foundations of an economy, like manufacturing and processing, right now that the electricity in France, their energy is not safe, they do not have a reliable place to get their energy from, this is why they're suffering.
So about 2 years ago, I made a video where I was calling out Macron and his and the French government when they were complaining and threatening to come at Niger for saying no more, right? Niger, a nation that they have exploited to absolute beyond abject poverty for decades, right? That they have been the colonial powers that have decimated this nation and many nations in Africa, right? That they were angry that Niger finally said enough is enough. We're cutting you off. Get out of our land. We're no longer doing business with you. If we die, we die by our own means. If we live by our own means, no longer because of your exploitation and colonialism and racism and just your death machines, right? And France and Macron complaining, how dare you do that? And I had so many French people come on those comments and tell me that I was wrong for thinking the way that I did because, hello, Africa can't just do that. Those operations and those plans, those mining plans belong to France. Okay, but does the land belong to France? Does the gold? Do the human beings who lose their lives mining in the most devastating conditions, are they also owned by France? And this is the crazy thing. The Western world and Eastern powers, a lot of the world for hundreds and hundreds of years has genuinely believed that they own Africa. That they absolutely own Africa, that how dare Africans realize that they are sovereign? How dare they take a stand against any Western power? Do they not know who they are? Well, now I say to you, France, do you know who Africa is? You always have. You always have, so much so that one of the former presidents of Africa, can't remember his name, it's not really significant, he spoke truth. He said that if Africa was ever to cut us off, we would become a third world nation. Not maybe, not we would struggle a little. We would become a third world nation. And lo and behold, beautiful sounds in my ears that over 11 and more countries that counting in Africa have said no more to France. Just 11, mind you. Just 11 in the continent have said no more.
As you just saw, the reactions are powerful and they paint a picture of a nation in crisis. And people on the streets are angry, protests are erupting, fires are burning, and the message is clear. France is really struggling. But what's really interesting is the root of these conversations, because Many people, especially across Africa, are pointing out that France's decline is tied to its colonial past, because for decades, France relied heavily on African nations. And not just for resources, but for economic stability as well. And when leaders like Ibrahim Traoré in Burkina Faso stepped in and said, well, enough is enough, it marked a turning point. And Traoré's leadership is being celebrated by many Africans because he pushed France out. He cut those exploitative ties and started focusing on bringing stability and order back to his nation. And that move inspired not just Burkina Faso, but also other African nations that are waking up and saying, we don't need to be exploited anymore. And that's why you're hearing voices saying France is finished without Africa. And it's not just an African perspective either. Even in Europe and in other parts of the world, and people are acknowledging that France cannot survive in the same way it used to without those resources. Well, another point people are bringing up is the political instability within France itself. And in just 1 year, the country has cycled through 3 prime ministers. And that constant change at the top is a clear sign of uncertainty. It's hard for any country to thrive when its leadership keeps changing. Add to that the protests, the economic challenges, and the global pressure. And you start to understand why so many people are saying France is at a breaking point. And what we are witnessing is bigger than just one country's struggle. It's about a global shift, a moment where the balance of power is changing. And where Africa is finally standing up, saying no to exploitation and showing that Europe cannot thrive at Africans' expense anymore. So, is France truly on the verge of collapse? Many people believe so, while others argue it's just a difficult phase. But one thing is certain, the world is watching closely, and the voices you've just heard are not going away anytime soon. So guys, that was just my perspective. Let me know what you have to say about this entire conversation in the comments below. I want to hear from you guys. And before you go, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more trending stories here at Trending Pulse Worldwide. Thank you so much for sticking around. My name is Amy, and I'll catch you guys in the next one. Stay blessed.